Hello everybody and welcome to day 5 of our Christmas special, where we're continuing to look at some of the most overpowered frost builds in Elden Ring, and today we're looking at a very unique build using one of the coolest katanas along with some pretty insane draconic spells. I feel it's going to be a favourite for those of you that are fans of being ancient samurais, so if you're excited for this particular build today, make sure you hit that like button. Of course, we're aiming for 150 likes. After today's video, we've got 2 more builds coming out to go out with a bang over the weekend, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on those crazy builds as well. But for now, let me show you this Draconic Samurai build. Now, for those of you that are fans of the katanas in Elden Ring, I'm sure you can probably guess what katana we're going to be using, but for those of you that are new to the game or never really used katanas before, we are in fact going to be using the Dragon Scale Blade. That is because this katana has a really cool Ash of War, the Ice Lightning Sword, which will then infuse it with its ice abilities. Using this katana along with some of the spells you get from the Dragon Communion will have you feeling like an absolute boss as you slice and roar your way through the entire game. But just before we jump into all of that crazy goodness, obviously I need to let you know how you get your hands on this weapon, and it is part of doing Rani's questline. Once you get far enough along and have access to the Lake of Rot area, there will be a dragon skin soldier in the far left of this particular lake, which upon defeating him you will then be granted with the Dragon Scale Blade. Again, for those of you that have watched the previous episodes, there's a common theme happening where these weapons are only dropped once per playthrough, and I do highly recommend dual wielding these katanas, as when you do dual wield them, you're going to do an insane amount of damage with them. So I would advise getting yourself into New Game Plus to obtain a second Dragon Scale Blade, or if you have a friend that's kind enough or has a surplus of this particular katana, maybe ask them nicely to drop you one so you can dual wield them in your first playthrough. Either way, if you don't have 2 of these blades, you can also use another katana, maybe something like the Rivers of Blood in your offhand, so then when you do infuse the Dragon Scale, you've got both a freeze effect katana in one hand and then also a bleed effect katana in the other. Either way, the reason why I say it's best to get 2 of these is because upon using the Ash of War, you will infuse the weapon with frost and also lightning damage, obviously dealing frost proc and also extra damage in the meantime. And the other caveat with the Dragon Scale Blade is that it does more damage against dragons. Typically, dragons in Elden Ring have a high resistance against slash damage, and where katanas are predominantly doing slash attacks, the Dragon Scale Blade has a plus 20% damage to regular dragons in the game, and then plus 10 damage to ancient dragons, basically negating the defect of the slash damage. This means that this is the best katana to use in the game against dragons, which are pretty much the only enemies that katanas are weak against, so it's a great all-rounder against anybody you face. And then, like I said at the beginning, if you also want to pair these 2 katanas with some of the Dragon Communion spells, especially ones like Borealis Mist or Dragon Ice to keep with that frosty theme, you will be able to take out enemies at range with those draconic spells and then follow up with some incredible damage with the dual wield katanas. Also, just to point this out in case you didn't know, the way that you infuse 2 weapons at once in Elden Ring is to first off dual wield the one in your left hand and use the Ash of War. So in order to do that, you either need to be holding triangle or Y, depending if you're on Xbox or PlayStation, and then press L1 or LB to make sure that your character is holding the weapon that was in your left hand now with both hands. For this particular weapon, you then just simply need to use the Ash of War, and then it will infuse it with that Draconic Lightning, and then all you need to do again is hold Y or triangle and then press the R1 or RB button once. So now you should be holding both weapons, one in your left hand that's infused with the Ice Lightning and one that's just the standard blade. Once you're standing with each weapon in each hand, you can then just simply press the LT or L2 button to use the Ash of War again, and then it will infuse the weapon in your right hand with the Ice Lightning again. And I know a lot of you already know how to do that. There was just a few comments in my previous video where we had a look at dual wielding weapons and infusing them with ice damage, so just in case there's a few of you watching that weren't too sure on how to do it, now you know how. And of course, once you've got both of those weapons infused, you can then run into pretty much any boss and deal a catastrophic amount of damage, in fact doing thousands of damage in mere seconds. And then if you are still mid-battle and you run out of that infusion, you can just swap out your left hand for the Dragon Communion spells and go ham with the Ice Breath, again dealing a lot of damage and ice proc, which will then freeze your enemies, making them slower, making them more vulnerable, and also makes them take more damage once they're frozen. And as I'm sure you can probably tell, with all of that combined, you've got a pretty insane build. But of course, you guys will obviously need to know the stats for the build, so you know the drill. Here they are on screen for you. We've got 45 points into Vigor, 20 points into Mind, and 24 in Endurance as usual, but then we've got 30 points into Strength, 60 points in Dexterity, 10 base Intelligence, so basically no points are put into Intelligence, 25 points into Faith, and 15 into Arcane. Those 25 points in Faith and 15 in Arcane are basically there to give us enough points to use the Draconic spells from the Dragon Communion, but I also bumped up the Faith to level 25 so I can also use incantations like Golden Vow, and the fact that Faith is a little bit higher will also increase the damage that we do with those Draconic spells. So as you can see there, we're delving a lot into Dexterity, as that is the main scaling point with these particular weapons, as well as putting a healthy amount into Strength. But if you wanted to delve more into Faith and Arcane to get even more damage out of the Dragon Communion spells, feel free to do that as well, because maybe you could take the 20 points that I put into Strength and put them straight into Faith and use other Draconic spells in the game, like Ancient Dragon Spear, or even maybe like Lansak's Glaive, to again extend the Draconic feel and Ancient feel around the Samurai build. But if you are going to mimic the stats and delve everything basically into the swords, I would also highly recommend using these following talismans. Because the Ash of War also does damage and will hit enemies, is not just there to infuse the weapon, it actually does quite a substantial amount of damage itself. I would also highly recommend running the Shard of Alexander, so it gives you a viable reason to use the Ash of War as an offensive attack, and obviously the Shard of Alexander will boost the damage that you do with that Ash of War. But again, if you're also mimicking me and dual wielding them, which I suggest you doing, I would also heavily recommend running the Rotten Wing Insignia talisman, as that will boost your damage output with successive attacks, and with dual wield katanas there are obviously a quick flurry of attacks, meaning you're going to get a very high DPS amount when using this particular talisman, especially if you're also then going to be running Millicent's Prosthesis, as that will further boost the consecutive damage that you're doing, and it will also grant a +5 in Dexterity, boosting the actual base damage of the weapon itself. And then finally, I would also recommend using the Dragon Great Shield, as that will just greatly boost your overall defense, meaning that you can get a bit more up close and personal if you wanted, and if you are going to trade a couple of hits, you're not going to take as much damage. And then just to top off the build altogether, for your Wonder Physic, I would also highly recommend that you use the Dexterity Knot tier to again just boost your base Dexterity to get the highest damage that you can out of the blade itself. But I would also highly recommend using the Cerulean Hidden tier, where we haven't delved too much into Mind. The Draconic spells do take up a lot of FP, so if you're using the Cerulean Hidden tier, that obviously negates FP consumption for 10 seconds, meaning that you can use 1 or 2 full bursts of the Draconic spells without having to replenish your FP. And then if you're like me and you want to also mimic this cool look, of course I'm using Ronan's Helm, along with Sullivus's cape, or at least Sullivus's outfit, along with scaled greaves and gauntlets, just to give that extra bit of protection. But yeah, like I say, this is definitely my favourite type of build to use in the game, especially for the looks and also just the raw damage output with the weapon. I can't lie, the Dragon Scale Blade was not one that I typically used, it's more so a weapon that I've used more recently for this particular series, but I've loved every minute that I have used it. In fact, as you can probably tell in the background from the footage, I started a new playthrough and I was in New Game +5 for this weapon, and it was still wiping the floor with most of the bosses I was coming up against. I can't lie, obviously the Draconic spells weren't necessarily doing too much damage, especially within this New Game Plus, but they were good at keeping range, still doing extra damage at the beginning of fights and dealing that extra frost proc. But like I said earlier, that's mainly because I've got literally the base Faith and Arcane to use these dragon spells, so if you wanted to boost your Faith and Arcane, you're more than likely going to be doing a lot more damage with those spells than what you're seeing on screen, and treat this more as like a mix between Faith and Dexterity. But either way, I definitely suggest that you give these weapons a go. They are an insane amount of fun, and even in the New Game Pluses, they tear everything up. And yeah, that is essentially everything that I need to show you about this particular build. You all seem to be really enjoying this series so far, because as I'm recording this voiceover, the first 2 videos have gone live already, and there's been a huge amount of support on both of those. So I just want to thank you all for showing so much support on this little mini series that we're running. Of course, if this is the first video that you're watching in the series, there is a link to the full playlist in the description down below, so even if you've missed those first couple of videos, feel free to click down there, watch it from the very beginning, check out all of the builds because they're all very, very good in their own terms. And like I said at the very beginning of the video, we've got 2 more builds coming for you this weekend to round off this little mini-series and week of insane frozen builds. So definitely make sure that you stay tuned for them because these 2 are literally going to be the best frost builds that you can use in the entire game. And if you want to have a guess as to what they are, whilst you're down there in the description, leave a comment telling me what you think these last 2 weapons are going to be, and I guess we'll see if you're correct by the time the weekend's over. But yeah, I'm gonna leave it there, guys. So again, thank you so much for watching this video. I really do hope you're having an amazing day, and of course I hope you have an amazing festive holiday. But for now, I'm gonna love you and leave you, and I guess I'll catch you tomorrow for another insane frost build. Bye bye.